We're live and on the air. Um, and this is kind of a first in a series of how to play RPGs or a certain RPG. So I started off with how to play the Song of Ice and Fire RPG, which seems to be very popular right now. Um, and the reason why I chose this one was I really got wrapped up in the system a lot, and I feel, it's a system that a lot of people would like to play, but kind of are afraid to kind of step into it a little bit. But right now, one thing that I'd like to do is just kind of get everyone settled in, and we'll go ahead and start here with the agenda. Um, I would like to kind of give a good game overview, kind of a little bit of the history of the game and what the versions are and everything like that. Then kind of go into the game mechanics a bit. Then after that, game setup and play and the pros and cons of the system. I don't want to make this feel like I'm trying to sell you all a game to play, which I kind of am in a little way, but but I want you to know what is the good part of it and really what is the bad part of it too. But anyway, before we head off, is there any questions before I start?
No.
No, okay. We'll go ahead and start with game overview. Okay, this particular game is the Song of Ice and Fire actually has been preceded by one other game and one other edition. The first game that ever came out that addressed role-playing in the world of George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series was actually a game that was put out by Guardians of Order. And these are the same people that put out Big Eye, Small Mouth, and I guess the Tri-Stat system. And it was entitled The Game of Thrones. And they'd also put out what was based on their Tri-Stat system, and also too a version of the rules that were D20 based. A lot of people who have played the RPG before are fairly familiar with this game. It didn't live too long. It was actually published in around 2005, 2006, and it ceased publication around 2007. And that was due to the fact that the company that published the book, Guardians of Order again, went out of business. George R.R. Martin actually bought up the remaining stock and kind of squared his licensing with this particular company. In about 2006, Green Ronin, the current publisher, picked it up and published basically what I call the orange edition of the Song of Ice and Fire, or the first edition to it. And it made a pretty big splash. A lot of people who are big Song and Ice and Fire fans probably know this book a lot better than the newer one. But the first edition book introduced a lot of neat features and stuff like that. Whenever the song, or not the song, but the Game of Thrones series came out on HBO, they kind of repackaged it a little bit into the current version that you see here. And they kind of expanded it a bit. They cleaned up the rules and they cleaned up the layout with the second edition. And they pretty much labeled it a Game of Thrones edition, just to kind of sell it to the public. There's about 4 books to this series, plus a Game Master screen. The book that you see here is the core book, which is, or the one on the left-hand side, is the core book. And that's the book that you obviously need to play the game. The 3 other books going to the right are the Campaign Guide, the Night's Watch Supplement, and the Chronicle Starter. The other 3 books you really don't need to play, but they do add a little bit of flavor to the setting. The Campaign Guide, if you're a real big George R.R. Martin fan, is very nice. It's very faithful to the subject matter, and it covers a lot of things in excruciating detail, including all the banner houses, It has maps of everything, a good detailed map of King's Landing, actually, and other things. The Night's Watch supplement basically adds on to the rule book. It's a supplement to the rules and really enables you to play the Night's Watch or even Wildlings. And the Chronicle Starter is basically something for GMs to have, and it's basically a kind of a help to get a campaign going or to give you ideas on how to design a house. But the main thing that you would need would be the core book, and the core book actually has everything that you would need to either play or run a campaign in Westeros. But anyway, this is the current version that's out, and like I said, you know, when I've went through the books, I've been very impressed by the quality that Green Ronin puts into these particular supplements and this core book. The core book is a little bit pricey. It'll cost you about $45 to buy it at a game store. I know the Gamers Armory has a copy of it for sale. It is offered on DriveThruRPG at a little bit less cost, but as a PDF. But the other books, you know, like I said, are worth getting if you really want to go into this kind of setting, in detail. Is there any questions, any comments? It's quiet.
The question for you. I've heard you describe how you've made the houses, and with the tables rolling and stuff like that. Is that in the main book, or was that in one of the other 3 books?
That'll be found in the core book. The core book will actually guide you through creating a house and creating the basic archetypes that you usually find in a Song of Ice and Fire game. Now, the Night's Watch actually expands on that a bit. It allows you to create Night's Watch garrisons and or wildling tribes and stuff like that, and it handles like the Night's Watch garrisons, much like creating a house, a regular house that you would find south of the wall per se. But of course, it's Night's Watch, and you can compete with other garrisons and stuff like that. The wildling tribes are about the same way, and right now I'm starting a campaign with wildlings, and it's been a pretty interesting experience. But one thing that I'm finding out too is that I think everyone who plays A Song of Ice and Fire probably needs a little bit of experience with the main rules before they move off into a supplement, just simply because the supplements address areas of the game or of the setting that you've got to be either really familiar with or familiar with the rules in order to design good characters. Is there any other questions? All right. What we're going to do is move off to game mechanics. The things I'll be going over are the character sheet, character building, the character archetypes, combat, intrigue, and warfare. If you can give me just a second here, I will pull up the character sheet. Can everyone see the character sheet okay? Or I need to do something else here.
Can't see the character sheet yet.
Okay, let me bring this off a screen share real quick. Kind of select screen share again. There we go. There we go. Can everyone see it now?
Yes, I can see
great.
it.
Great. I'll get used to this, so you'll have to kind of excuse me as I kind of go through this and kind of get used to Hangout a little bit. The character sheet is your basic character sheet. It's 2 pages. The first page is the information that really counts, like your well, of course, your name, but your ability scores, your weaponry, and stuff like that. Kind of going from the top a bit, underneath the name, age, gender, and house.
Can you enlarge it a little bit?
Let me see here. All right, we'll bring it up. Is that good right there?
Yes, it's a little bit
Okay.
bigger so we can
Yeah.
That's better.
Okay. I'll bump it just a little bit larger. All right. Um, Basically, in the mechanics area, the game depends on what is basically a dice pool system, and it's what is called a roll and keep kind of mechanic. Um, Everything, all your character is built off of the abilities that you see on this character sheet. You got agility, animal handling, athletics, so on and so forth. It's kind of gotten away from the usual D&D stats of strength, intelligence, constitution, and all that. So it's your character is less what he is physically or she is physically or mentally, and more of what they can really do. So they're not really gauged by their direct strength or their direct intelligence, but rather by what they can do. Now, each of these abilities actually has a specialty that goes along with it. So if you have an agility of 3, you could have a specialty in contortion at 2 bonus dice. So really, you're looking at the roll and keep system. You get to roll 3 dice for your agility. So every number that you see is essentially your dice pool number. Your specialties actually add on to your ability. So if you were a contortionist or an acrobat and you had plus 2 bonus dice in that, you would actually add those bonus dice to your pool. So you'll be throwing 5 dice instead. So whenever you throw your dice, basically you don't get to keep everything. You eliminate the 2 dice, the 2 lowest dice that your specialty would have added on to, which kind of drives up your score a little bit on your dice and stuff like that. So it's much like 7th Sea if you've ever played 7th Sea, except you're playing the Song of Ice and Fire with 6-sided dice as opposed to 10-sided dice that would be found in 7th Sea. Any questions before I move on?
Do you just need a D6, you said, only for the rest of the game for damage?
That would be the type of dice that you'd use. You probably would need about between 8 and 12 dice in all, because all these dice will create a pool. And a lot of times these pools can get rather large, but not normally anything over 12 dice. Okay? Okay. Any more questions?
So there's not exactly character classes in a typical sense then?
No, actually not, and I'm going to address that in just a few minutes. But no, you won't find character classes like fighter or rogue or wizard or anything like that. There are archetypes that you can model your character after, but this is very much a point-buy system too, and I'll go into that also. So you basically design the character that you want. Okay, going down a little bit, you see qualities, and basically qualities are kind of modifiers to your abilities. Qualities have either benefits or drawbacks. If you've played GURPS before, or any game that has advantages and disadvantages, qualities are the same thing. Qualities are based off of points called destiny points, and I'll go into that a little bit later too. But qualities, good qualities like benefits, help your character out, while drawbacks actually hurt your character, but drawbacks actually give you more destiny points back. Now, destiny points is an interesting concept too. It's much like fate points in some other games. Destiny points allow you to improve your dice rolls, improve anything that you can, or give you re-rolls and stuff like that. And that's the function of destiny points. Now, you'll see on the right, you'll see intrigue and combat. The Song of Ice and Fire treats intrigue and combat pretty similarly. As a matter of fact, you'll find out that the same, they use the same mechanic essentially for each one of these. You actually have an intrigue defense and you have composure. And composure basically is your hit points whenever you're in an intrigue combat. And intrigue is a pretty interesting concept, and they do a good job of it, but I'll explain that a little bit later on. Combat essentially is, if you want to make a comparison to it, of course health would be your hit points. Combat defense is how hard you are to hit, or your armor class essentially. And one thing I'll tell you in this game is the more armor you have, the much easier you're to hit. So a high combat defense is desirable, but if you put more armor on yourself, it lowers that. But it makes you also hard to damage, and I'll go over that a little bit later. And of course you got your weapons, armor rating, armor penalties, damage and injuries. Damage and injuries are handled a little bit differently in the Song of Ice and Fire. You have your regular hit points, which would be your damage, but a lot of times that can be modified by your injuries or even wounds. And I'll go into that a little bit later too. On the other side of the character sheet, you have wounds, which you'll list, and pretty much other things that kind of add to the fluff of your character, like equipment, appearance, retainers, personal history, allies, enemies, oaths, so on and so forth. So basically the front page of your character sheet is the technical stuff, the back page is the fluff. Is there any questions before I move on? Or am I moving too fast? Give me a holler too at that, because I'm nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous. You're not. You're doing fine.
It's been a while since I've done this, so please bear with me. Like I said, at the end of anything, if you have any questions, please ask. Also, too, let me go ahead and get into a little bit of the mechanics here. Let me look at my thing. All right. So I'm going to go into the actual book here, so bear with me for a second. All right. And I will knock it off screen share. All right, here's the core book, and what we'll kind of explore first are the different the character building aspect of this game. Essentially, character building is by a point-buy system. And let me go ahead and get us to the right page here, and I'll jump up the size of this so everyone can see. Okay. Okay, we'll go to character creation a little bit. Whenever you create a character, the first thing that kind of you'll be doing is actually either rolling for your age, or picking your age. And age in the Song of Ice and Fire is very important, because whatever age that you pick gives you the amount of points that you can use to build your character with. And this goes into a fairly detailed description of age. But let me see here if I can get to the right table. But it gives you, we'll go on, I'm not going to wander here too much, but you'll pick out your age, it'll give you a certain amount of points in which to build your character with. Usually, players I've noticed usually pick either young adult or adult characters, simply because that gives them either room to grow into a character and gives them enough points for survivability, or they pick it old just to kind of get the maximum amount of points. The next thing that's very important is your status. The higher status you have, the more clout you have with other NPCs and stuff like that. And this is very important in this game because whenever you're playing members of a household. And having a larger status means that you can deal with people below your status a lot easier, or people above you. You have a little bit more of a chance to be able to deal with them successfully. Let me flip on over here. Now the game has other tables too, which you can either, pick out like background events or goals, or randomize it however you see fit. But it's very interesting, and like I said, the tables give you a pretty wide, selection of things. You get, any kind of background event, what your goals are and stuff like that. And so far that when I've played with my players, they really enjoy using these tables and kind of basing their characters' backgrounds off of this. All right, let me move on here a bit.
Do you roll all those? Oh, I'm sorry.
You can roll all of those, or you can pick them out. But typically, your age actually will dictate how many events you get in your life, and what you can roll too. So the older you are, the more experienced you are, the more events you'll have in your life. Right. And on this table right here kind of is an indicator of how many points you get to start off with. And the thing about this game too, it kind of limits you about your maximum starting rank. So you can't take all your points and pour them all into one ability and become super good. There are some mechanisms here that kind of prevent you from doing that a little bit, but that's good too because it helps you round out your character a little bit more. Some people like trying to max their starting rank out, and a lot of people that I've played with so far enjoy, becoming the jack of all trades. Typically, you start out at a 2 starting rank, and that's considered average. So you build up your ability from there a bit. You can also go down to a 1 ability rank and get 50 points back. And a lot of times people will do that in order to build up their character in other areas and give them a little bit more points. But then again, whenever you deke your ability that low, of course the GM takes notice about that and kind of does things to challenge your character with their lack of ability and stuff.
I'm sure there are some things, though, that some characters shouldn't know anyway, so it sounds good to me.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with this. In my first game, I only allowed, one ability to be reduced by 1 to 1. In the Wildlings game, I've allowed 2, and I can kind of see a difference in how players use their points and stuff like that. It's a pretty interesting thing, but the point buys, or your typical point buys for your characters and stuff like that. So let me move on here. Now, your characters also get kind of points apart from their ability cost. They get points for their specialties also. Now, specialties are pretty important to add to your, characters, abilities. There's a lot of specialties, and the specialties are pretty much glued to each ability. Also, too, you get your ability, you get your points per your age also. So the younger you are, the less able you are to, do things. And the older you are, the more that, you'll have specialties and things. But these tables give you the point cost and stuff like that. Of course, the last thing that you collect are destiny points. And destiny points go into buying benefits, or in some instances, if you take drawbacks, drawbacks give you back destiny points. But destiny points are used in one or two ways. One, to buy your benefits. And benefits actually modify what your abilities can do. So if you're a good swordsman, you may have a benefit, or you may have a benefit that adds to it, like you're an expert at using the long blades, which kind of gives you more to damage and stuff like that, as long as you're using like a long sword or something like that. Of course, the older you get, the more drawbacks you collect. So when people usually start off, they usually look at this table, because a lot of times people don't want to start off with a drawback to their character. As a young adult, you don't have any drawbacks, but as an adult, you have to pick one. And drawbacks, again, you got to play them as part of your character. Now, it's pretty interesting. Some people revel in it, and I got one player in the my Wildlings game who's decided to kind of go whole hog as far as their flaws are concerned, and he's got one that has disturbing habits. And I said, well, how are you going to play that? And he said, well, I got a wolf. So that kind of gets your brain to going, exactly what do you do with the wolf? But anyway, destiny points basically go into either buying benefits, or also to improving other scores and stuff like that. Is there any questions before I move on? And hopefully I'm not boring everybody. Is everyone okay with this?
Yeah.
So far, so good?
Yes. Quick question.
Sure.
You were saying in the second game you allowed them to have two stats with one. Is that bad or better? Or are you finding more min-maxing, or are they using them better, or what?
I'm finding the more that I allow them to go back on a stat, allows a little bit more min-maxing. I have a couple of players who've kind of packed their some of their abilities to the maximum, and with the benefits to go along with it. So it does encourage it a little bit, but again, it's all in the experimentation. But if you give people points to use, they're going to use them in any way they possibly can to make their character better. All right. So that's basically how you're building a character in this game. One thing I wanted to go over really quick and everything is the archetypes that they have. I know Katie asked about character classes, and again, this game does not have character classes per se. And really, the archetypes are only kind of an example of what you can do as far as your characters are concerned. What kind of characters would be the best suited for this particular game? And they have a few in this core game that basically go along with what you can be. Like, you can either be an anointed knight, which is, the guys who go around being, Sir Jaime Lannister, and, who usually have, Sir in their names and stuff like that. These are guys who were nobles, and decided to go off and pursue an ideal. These kind of characters are what a lot of people try to pick up on if you're kind of into combat and stuff like that. But amazingly enough, in the Players and Pieces game that I'm playing, I've only got one character who would be considered an anointed knight. The other characters are basically a little bit different in that regard. Next thing that you can take is a Godsworn, or anyone who kind of prescribes to a faith. Now, if you're familiar with the books, you have either the Faith of the Seven, you have the Old Gods. If you're from the Iron Islands, you have the Drowned Gods, and whatever other small pantheons are out there. I think there's the Red God and stuff like that. But this basically covers, anyone who wants to prescribe to a faith. Now, one thing that I'll tell you about is don't make a comparison between this and Dungeons and Dragons. Godsworn may be good healers, but they're not the ones that throw spells, like healing spells or anything like that. They're more of a informational or knowledgeable people more than they are anything else. They're not spellcasters per se. You're just a person who knows a lot who prescribes to a faith. You got air. Joffrey Baratheon would fit nicely into this. The game tries to cover all sorts of statuses. So if you were taking a noble or a first son, first daughter, second daughter, you would take an heir and basically play that. And it also gives you kind of a subclass. You'll see that some of these classes, or some of these archetypes, have like you're a leader, or you're a warrior, or you're a schemer, and stuff like that. So basically, if you're a leader, you're basically like Eddard Stark. You lead men. If you're a schemer, you're like Cersei Lannister. You're kind of cunning and conniving, and you're kind of one of these people that kind of fish around the courts, for an advantage. There's other things too, like warrior, and warrior is basically your fighter. You got hedge knights, who are poor knights. You have maesters, who are experts, and expert would mean you're very good at whatever you're doing. Also, too, you got nobles. Nobles can be schemers also. You can, as a noble, you can be many things. You can be a direct heir, a displaced heir, and sometimes a bastard. But, you can have several different kinds of archetypes. But you don't have to fit yourself in one. These are basically suggestions for the game. Is there any questions?
Have you found that in the games that you've ran with this system so far, have you focused more on fighting-based adventures or more on kind of social or political adventures?
I'll be really honest with you. It is hard to get into a combat with this game. You mainly have people who really want to focus on intrigues. I'm finding this true. I found this true in the first campaign that I played, where people were pretty enthralled in the happenings in their house more so than trying to get out and get into a combat. The Wildlings game is beginning to pan out the same way. Most all the players want to avoid combat, and they want to talk, and they want to figure themselves out of situations. So yeah. With this game, people want to try out the intrigue combats a lot more than they do the regular, sword or sword combats and stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting in that regard. But yeah, people want to talk and they want to have their intrigues. All right, any other questions?
Has anyone specifically made a warrior or a knight, or are they avoiding that? Your game,
okay. In my first game, which was more of a traditional, house, you're creating a house and putting it in Westeros, I've only had, out of the party of about 6, I've only had 2 warriors in that party. The rest were what you can consider schemers or nobles. And that's the problem too, because a lot of people have the mindset they want to do more intrigues with this game too. And I'm having, I've had a couple of times to kind of go find something for my warriors to do. The one that was the Anointed Knight, of course, that opens up the pathway of having a tourney. And I did do a tourney as one of the games or one of the adventures, and that turned out probably to be one of the most exciting adventures we had in the campaign as of yet. But as far as just out and out fights, I have very few of those. Any other questions? All right. Basically, I got this on Scout right now, and essentially they have the abilities filled out, and you can kind of see, in the making of a character, and I'll kind of bring this up a little bit more so everyone can see how each of these characters are created. You have a scout here who depends a lot on agility and stuff like that, but the main thing that this person who made up this character, what they did was put everything into marksmanship. Now, in combat, the Song of Ice and Fire handles combat a little bit differently than most games that you're probably involved with. Essentially, whenever you create like a warrior or anything like that, you have to decide whether or not this warrior is going to be more of a hand-to-hand kind of person or someone who uses a lot of marksmanship, a lot of bows and stuff like that. If you're going to make uses swords and stuff like that, you have to make the person very athletic, because in this game you don't have weapons that cause 1d8 worth of damage or anything like this. All your damage is basically a flat number, and that's basically derived off of your athletics plus whatever modifier is on the weapon. So if you're using a short sword, and if you go to the weapons list, you'll find out that not short sword, but the long sword does athletics +1. So essentially, if this person is using a long sword, it would be a long sword. It'd be long sword, but it would be athletics of 4 +1. So this person would do a flat number of 5 points of damage at least. But that'll be modified, and I'll tell you how that happens in a few minutes. So let me go on here a little bit. So we've covered archetypes. Now we're going to kind of address combat a little bit. And like I said, with combat's a little bit different in this game. And combat and intrigue and warfare are the three major components to this game as far as what actions you can do. But they are all kind of a unified mechanic in a lot of ways. They play very similarly, all three of them do. With combat, I'll kind of go through this really quick. If I can kind of get myself organized here. All right. All right. With combat, it's a little bit different than what like I said, D&D is in a lot of aspects. With combat in the Song of Ice and Fire, a lot of it is dependent on your basic abilities. Agility and marksmanship, kind of add into being a good person with a bow. Marksmanship is essentially how good you are, at hitting a target. Agility is, how nimble you are at aiming. So agility would figure into the damage that your weapon would do, as opposed to athletics and fighting, which would be basically the two abilities you would take if you're a sword fighter. your fighting would be, how good you are at planting how good you are at using a sword, whereas athletics is how strong you are and how much damage your sword can do. Now, what modifies that is, of course, you can wear armor, and armor gives you protection, but it makes you slower. So if you have a lot of armor on, you essentially are easier to hit, which makes your combat defense go down, but your armor actually too absorbs damage. So a full-plated knight can absorb about 10 points of damage. So, that makes you a lot harder to hurt in a lot of ways, but it makes you a lot easier to hit too, because typically your combat defense would be about a 5 or a 7. And that means that anyone who's rolling against you would have to, roll a 5 or a 7 on probably about 4 or 5 dice in order to hit you, which is pretty easy to do, actually. Now, health is much like your hit points in Dungeons and Dragons, except with health, you can do a couple of things. One thing that can happen is that you can take up all your, health and, get injured that way, or a lot of times when you're going up against the opponent, sometimes you may take injuries and get it down to a bare minimum. You may get yourself down to 0 hit points or something like that. This game allows you to stay in the fight a little bit longer by allowing you to do one or two things. One is that you can take an injury, and an injury would be times 3 of any endurance that you want to take. So if you have 3 endurance points in your ability scores, you can actually take up to, absorb up to 9 points of damage or bring back 9 points of damage for yourself before you're kind of out of the fight. Now, sometimes you'll go up against opponents that are fairly big and bulky and strong. I had one guy of mine in the Players and Pieces campaign go up against Gregor Clegane, which was pretty interesting because he was stupid enough to kind of try to fight the guy. Now, Gregor Clegane is no one you want to screw around with. He has like an athletics of 8, which is beyond, the highest that anyone could take. Now, in this game, 7 is basically the top level. You're a paragon. If you have a 7 in any ability score, you're basically a paragon at what you do. You're very good at it. Gregor Clegane, if I can pronounce his name correctly, is kind of in his athletics and his fighting, he's rated at an 8. So, very much so, with what armor or what weapons he has, he can basically take someone out very easily with one hit. And the game has a mechanic in it to where you can kind of absorb the damage, but at a cost. Now, injuries are one thing, and injuries allow you to stay into the game at a cost of basically -1 to any roll that you make. Now, if you go up against, Gregor Clegane and he hits you and does about 40 points of damage, which is very possible with him, you can actually also take a wound, which basically means that you get to cheat death, I guess, a little while at a cost. And if you take a wound, basically you're minusing off any die rolls that you make in the future at 1 dice. So you can take up as many wounds as you have endurance points again. So combat with this can either be fast or it can be very slow. But a lot of times people just really, avoid it altogether in favor of intrigue. Now, intrigue is probably the one thing that this game has that's a huge advantage over a lot of other games. Now, intrigue is done much like, and I'll shift over to the character sheet. is done a lot like combat. And is everyone kind of sticking with me on this a little bit? Hopefully I'm not rattling on too much.
Nope.
You good, Melissa? You're not falling asleep on me?
No, I'm doing good.
Okay, good. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to intrigue?
You said before there was something called damage. How is that different from your
Okay.
health?
Intrigue is very interesting because it's done much like combat is. Okay. You can take okay, as far as intrigue goes or as far as combat goes? As far as combat goes, your hit points are basically what damage you're taking right now. Now you can take an injury, and basically an injury is a mechanism to where you're kind of getting scratched and bruised with your hit points. An injury is you really get cut with something. Okay? Now, and you can add back hit points to that. Now, a wound is something a lot greater. A wound is if somehow someone makes a pretty big goes right through your armor and into you. You're bleeding like crazy, but you're still alive. A wound keeps you alive, or has that ability to. So if your character only can take 15 points of damage and you're hit with 30 points of damage, kind of in any other game like D&D, you would be dead. But in this game, you can say, I'm going to take a wound, and basically you'll take the minus in your die rolls. So instead of getting to roll, for your fighting 5 dice, now your dice pool is reduced by 1, so you're rolling 4 dice instead. So that's a mechanic to kind of keep your character in the game if they're in combat. Intrigue is a little bit different. Now, intrigue depends on your composure and your intrigue defense. And essentially, it's done the same way as combat is, except with intrigue, I can get this going over here and not bug everybody. Oh, man. Okay, hold on, bear with me for just a second. Intrigue's a lot different. Intrigue is essentially probably the meat and potatoes of this game. A lot of people like playing this game in order to get into the intrigues more than they do the combat. And the game is really, geared to more of using your brain rather than using brawn. Although they have the combat rules, the intrigue rules are a bit different. You can engage in a simple intrigue. You can, which is basically trying to, quickly, convince somebody to do something, or seduce somebody, or deceive somebody. Or standard intrigues, which take a little while to do, which basically may happen over the course of a conversation. I've done several standard intrigues, and they're very interesting. Essentially, with an intrigue, you do have a goal to what your character can do, and basically, you basically fight back and forth until that goal is met. So if your character is wanting to convince another character that their idea is the best idea, you're trying to persuade somebody, and the other person, would have a defense against that, and you can go back and forth with it. But you have other intrigues too, which are like, if I can get over here, like complex intrigues too, which are essentially a bunch of standard intrigues stapled together. And basically, what it is that you're having probably a bunch of meetings with one person, and usually seductions are usually considered complex intrigues. But there's many ways that you can handle an intrigue and stuff like that. but the rules are fairly complex not fairly complex, but they're fairly good for intrigues. They're take a little bit of getting used to. But I've had several interesting experiences with intrigues. Is there any questions before I move on?
How similar is it to the mouse guard social interaction?
It's a little bit similar, because mouse guard, what it depends on is essentially, I think, 3 dispositions or something. You can either attack, defend, feint, or something like that.
Right, or maneuver. Mm-hmm.
Or maneuver. It's similar to that, because you're kind of, whenever you're playing it out, you are going back and forth. So essentially, when you role play it, you're essentially you're basically rolling initiative, with your status. Then when you go into the intrigue itself, you're kind of going back and forth with it. You're attacking, if you're doing a persuasion, you're attacking, but you have to actually role play that out. Now, they have a small mechanic in here. If you're doing a good job, if you're a fairly eloquent speaker, I can give you, as a GM, a circumstance dice for someone who makes a particularly good point. But you're very much like mouse guard. You're going back and forth, and until one side or the other, wins. Essentially, is that. And essentially, like I said, you have composure, and those are your intrigue hit points. And whenever one person's reduced to 0 composure, they basically yield over. They essentially give what you're trying to get as far as a goal is concerned. So if you're trying to get information and you win an intrigue, you would get that information. If you were trying to deceive someone, the same way, your deception was successful. Okay, is there any more questions? And anything I'm not really covering that you want to ask about?
I'm good.
Okay, you're good? Okay. I'm not going to go into warfare because right now the time is ticking away a little bit. Warfare is actually a pretty nifty thing too. And I've used all 3 of these things, and I've used warfare before. And warfare is interesting because you're taking it's large-scale combat. And essentially, if you build a house, you'll end up building an army too, or at least a small garrison for protection. And the warfares cover that kind of combat. So essentially, you can basically almost play a war game off of the warfare, and it's very interesting. But anyway, I'm going to move on a little bit, and that's a little bit of talking about the playing mechanics and stuff like that. I'll go a little bit into the house building and the game setup and gameplay. And essentially, the first thing that you'll ever want to do if you're running a game or playing a game is essentially build your house. House building is probably one of the most fun things that you can do in this game. And the reason why it's so fun is, everyone gets to participate in much, best done as a random thing. So you're going around the table and you're rolling for your resources and stuff like that. Here, let me get this up real quick, and hopefully I can do this house and lands. Creating the house. Okay. Essentially, you would roll for what area first that you want your house to be in. And essentially, they have a lot of the stuff kind of weighted a little bit. So the larger area, you have more of a chance to, land as your starting realm. When I did Players and Pieces, the players actually rolled the reach. So whenever you're doing this and you're rolling your house, everyone around the table is rolling. So, the first person would roll the starting realm, and the second person would start rolling up different things, like for your starting resources, like one person would roll defense, another person would roll influence and lands and law. And then you would be building your house up. Wherever you're at modifies, whatever points that you have to, start off with. So if you're in the reach and you're rolling for your defense, the reach, is essentially a large place and it's very hard to defend. So your defense resource would go down by -5. But you basically, all along, you're building your house up. You're building, what influence you have, which is basically, what heirs you can have in your house and stuff like that. Your lands is how much physical land that you command. Law is the law that, is essentially what control you have on your own people. Population, power, population is what you have as far as people are concerned. And some of this stuff kind of adds into another mechanic they have in this game called House Fortunes. Now, House Fortunes are pretty interesting because whenever you build a house up, it'll be scored, with these points. So you may have a defense of 25, which, with this game is defensible. But your lands could be sprawling. You could have like a 50 in land. So so you're basically building your house up. House Fortunes actually, you roll after each game, and actually the GM tries to play off your House Fortunes. Now, House Fortunes are fairly interesting because, you can either have a disaster, which takes away from your resources, or gradients thereof until you get to glory, which is basically you get all these resources for your house. So whenever you play a game, you have this house, you have all these resource numbers, and basically as players you invest in each of these things. So if you have defense, you're basically using that if I can untwist my tongue, you're using those points in order to build castles and stuff. Your land is, again, how much land you physically have. Influence, in this game, you just simply can't decide to be an heir to a house. Before you can actually have a player who can become, an heir to the house, and that would go with, sons and daughters and stuff like that. You have to buy maesters and stuff like that too. So, this is the first thing you need to do before you even design a character is build your house up. Is there any questions?
How often do you have to overrule or change one of the random dice rolls on the table for the houses because it doesn't make sense or it's not something that the players want?
Okay, as far as the house is concerned, essentially you can play it one or two ways. You can make it all, random. Essentially what you're doing is going around the table, and after each roll, you kind of decide on how that would fit with your house. So not only are you rolling the dice, you're kind of trying to get an image of what your household would look like.
But as you get farther along in the process, does sometimes an unsatisfactory result shows up that just doesn't quite make sense with what everyone's been talking about and brainstorming about?
Occasionally that would happen, but I haven't had it happen at all with this. But if you had something like that happen, if they kind of were looking at, okay, this is really horrible, as a GM, you can allow a reroll. There's no mechanic in that. Essentially, you can do house creation one or two ways. You can, pick off the, charts, or you can do it randomly. But if I had a bad roll that wouldn't really go along with the concept, I would ask for a re-roll and see if they could get any better. Like I said, with players and pieces, whenever we were developing the house for that, essentially that wasn't a problem. Everyone kind of played with the rolls that they got, which kind of gave you a pretty interesting house in itself. They ended up having a household that was on a small island, and essentially they were kind of they kind of reasoned that they were kind of the leftovers from Robert's Rebellion. They didn't have a lot of population. They didn't have a lot of defense, and but they had enough to buy an island and put themselves on an island, and they had a lot of influence, strangely enough. So as you're doing this, you're kind of trying to cobble this into what you feel would be the what you think your household would be, and what your view of your household would be, or what your concept of it is. Is there any more questions?
So how did that work out, the scenario that you were describing? How did that end up working out with whatever kind of story you had planned for them? If they determined randomly where they were in the world and what their situation, social situation was, how does that play into your story?
Okay, what I did, I was very careful not to write out the story before I seen what they could do. I kind of had an outline, so essentially when they designed their household, that's when I started, writing the story. But I did write out the complete season. I decided it would be 8 game sessions, and and stuff like that. And even when you plan something out like that, things will turn left at Albuquerque fairly soon, and that's what happened halfway in. I had it, pretty much programmed until one point to where I had everyone go off their little island and go into the largest city that was nearby, which would have been Old Town. And then things got pretty interesting. And that was a lot my own fault, because I started seeing a lot of different possibilities. And the decisions that they were making as characters kind of played into that. But as far as their house is concerned, their house actually has grown mightily. When they first started, they had so they've been able to grow their household up and their influence also. So as their household has grown, I've played the scenarios off of that too. So they go to this tourney, and actually their knight does really well. So I kind of add that into, now they're getting very well known within the Reach itself, and I usually play that off, and now they're kind of getting added into these household, regional type of intrigues and stuff like that. So you have to roll with the blows with this, but at the very first, you don't really want to design your scenarios until you know exactly what they end up with as far as a household is concerned, because you have different regions, and one thing that you could be planning for a campaign in the north, they end up rolling something in the southern land of Dorne, could play out very, very differently. Is there any questions?
What's the experience ramp like for the houses? Like, how fast do they gain influence?
That really depends on the players and depends on how smart they are at allotting their resources. Now, a lot of the house growth depends on two or three factors. One is whenever you do an adventure as a GM, you're offering experience points. You're either offering experience points, money, or what's called glory. Glory is basically points that you can put towards your house in order for it to grow. Glory is kind of like movable resource points. So you can add it to populations and lands and stuff like that. So the more successful your players are as far as gathering glory, the more points they'll allot. Now, the one thing that you got to bear in mind is that they got to allot them in the right places. There's a couple of things like population and power that give you plus modifiers to your house fortunes. The better you can roll on a house fortune, the more chance you have of doing well. So it depends on what your players actually do, and how loyal they are to their household. Does that answer your question?
Yep, makes sense.
Okay, good. Let me see here. Okay, and that kind of, does kind of, go into the next thing that I was going to talk about, which was experience and money and glory. This system actually, essentially, like I said, is a point-buy system, and it handles experience a little bit differently than your regular Dungeons and Dragons system. Whereas experience in those kind of systems allow you to gain power as a character, experience in this game is spent much like a game of GURPS or something like that. So you earn your experience, and essentially, let me see here if I can do this. You earn your experience and you spend it back on your character. You can either buy your abilities, you can buy up your abilities, you can buy up your bonuses, or you can buy extra destiny points. Now, like I said, I was going to talk a little bit more about destiny points. Destiny, like I said, changes a lot of your die rolls and stuff like that. And there's two things that you can do with your destiny points. One is you can spend them and get better die rolls. Two is you can burn them. Now, this is where destiny points really act as fate points. You can avoid death with your destiny point, as if you burn a destiny point. And when you burn a destiny point, you're kind of eliminating a destiny point permanently from your character. So the next time around, you're going to have less destiny to put into a benefit or be able to use to get your hiney out of the get your bacon out of the out of the fire, as you can say. But you can buy stuff with your experience. Now you can earn money like you would in D&D, which would enable you to buy better things like better armor or fancier clothes, which would add on to any influence pluses and stuff like that you would want to make. And two, the third thing you can get is glory. And glory is probably the most desirable thing because most players usually live for their household and want to see their household improve. So, whenever you get glory, your house, does a lot better. But that's about it. Okay, I'm going to move down to pros and cons of the system. Now, let me see here if I can get this thing going again. All right. The pros and cons of the system. The pros of the system are this game is very, very honest to the setting of the Song of Ice and Fire. It's very well written in that regard, and there's a ton of information that they have. Now, some of the supplements, like the Night's Watch, they do admit they kind of go off a canon a little bit in order to kind of fill in some of the blanks, but on the whole, they've done their research with this and have done an excellent job of writing up a very, very accurate setting for this game. The combat systems for intrigue, combat, and warfare are very unified. So if you get to know one, you kind of got a good handle on how the others work. The house creation system is pretty fun, and the character archetypes are great because they kind of guide you with this. Now, one thing that I'll say as far as the cons are concerned is some of the areas of the rules do need work. There are some things that are obviously broken that you kind of need to keep an eye on. One thing in this game is your awareness. There's a benefit that kind of allows you to, improve your dice rolls a lot in this. And very perceptive players I've had in both of my games have taken this high awareness with this benefit. And typically they're not, and with this game you're kind of rolling over a challenge number. And the challenge numbers are usually set at a normal challenge would be a 9. So you have to overcome a 9 on a roll in order to succeed. Or if it's a little bit hard, it's a 12. If it's very difficult, it's a 15. Now, the part where it's kind of broken at is with the awareness is most of the rolls that the characters I've had take this haven't gotten anywhere, have only dipped, once under an 18? And usually go about 25 to 30. So, some parts of the system are broke. And it's not a backward compatible system. So if you have like the Orange Book, a lot of the rules have changed between the Orange Book and the Game of Thrones version of the book. The book layout is a little bit confusing. So I was hoping to use the book to kind of guide a little bit, and I got lost in it. So it is a little bit confusing to use a little bit. The system is of a moderate difficulty level too. So if you're a new player trying to learn this, that's going to be a little bit difficult. You need to have a little bit of experience with a role-playing system in order to really play this game and get something out of it. Another con would be you have to have a little bit of knowledge of the Song of Ice and Fire too to really get anything out of this game. If you come in and you don't really know a lot about it, it's kind of hard to make the association. But other than that, do we got any questions? Anything else? All right. Thank you very much for at least braving through this first one and everything, and how to play. Have you gotten a lot out of this? A little bit out of it? Has it inspired you? Has it put you off?
I like it. It sounds fun. When are you running another one?
Okay. I'll be running a Night's Watch game at the Crimson Boar. I'm switching out games, actually. I was originally slated to do a Castles and Crusades game with 2 sessions. No one was taking a bite out of it. And I decided to write Richard and say, hey, I'm going to do a Night's Watch game. So my next game is going to be at the Crimson Boar. And I'll probably play it in first session.
Sounds good.
So if you want to give it a shot there, I'd be more than happy to take any players. Another thing too is I'm very willing to do any try it out. So if you're interested enough, I'll be willing to do just a simple out and out try it out, or anything you'd like to explore with the game itself. I know it's a lot of explaining, and really I just skipped over the high parts of the game. It is a wonderful game to play, though. All right.
I did. Oh, I was just going to say, just kind of to Melissa, I did a, just one-off thing at the GM fair, I guess. Was that what it was? It was the thing that was at the Red Sun Academy place.
Okay, with John Knight.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.